Okay, let's get going. If you could go to the next slide, please, Gabby. So thanks very much for dialing in your lunch break to hear about Anglian Water's Strategic Pipeline Alliance. We've got a variety of speakers, some really interesting subjects that I'm sure will get some real engagement in terms of some of the innovation, some of the approaches that we're adopting on SPA. So you can see the areas we're going to cover. I'm going to give a brief overview. We'll have a quick culture of innovation moment before we talk about the engineering aspects, waterless commissioning, and then 6 capitals before we go on to the Q&A panel. Okay, next slide, please. So this is your panel today. They will introduce themselves as they do their particular piece of the presentation. So myself, I'm Matt Kuhn. I'm head of production and engineering systems on SPA. So I look after all of the front end solution and design, which is very exciting to do. So welcome and again, thanks for dialing in. Okay, next slide, please. And then next slide, we'll skip straight into it. So just to give a bit of context about the size of Anglian Water. So it's the largest water and water recycling company in England by geographical area. You can see some of the statistics there, 7 million customers across the largest geographical area of any water company. It's also the fastest growing area for house building, or one of the fastest, with an extra 175,000 houses to be built by 2025. And you can imagine all of the pressure that comes with that. As a business, the strategic direction is around making the east of England resilient to drought and flooding, as we see the impact of climate change. A big push to get net zero by 2030, and obviously, as you imagine, SPA could take a lot of carbon up, enabling that sustainable economic and housing growth, which is really important, and working with others to deliver ecological benefits and quality across our catchments. Next slide, please. The Anglian region itself has some particular unique challenges. We spoke about the population growth, so a huge population growth. It's a very low-lying region, so lots of pumping water around. Can't rely on lots of hills and mountains to gravity feed everywhere. It's one of the driest regions in the UK. In fact, my favourite fact of the day is that it's drier than Jerusalem, has less average rainfall than Jerusalem. So you can just imagine how little rainfall we actually get in the whole area. Like all water companies, Anglian Water has a 25-year water resource management plan. That's identified 4 kind of key challenges, key areas. So climate change, growth, environmental protection, and really importantly, resilience to drought as those climate change impacts kick in. It looked at a variety of options. So one of them managing demand through leakage reduction, through using less water per capita. But even with all of those measures in place, there's still a need to be able to transport water around its entire network more flexibly than it currently does. Next slide, please. So the strategic pipeline is one of the major investments that Anglian Water will be making as part of that 25-year plan. It's a hundreds of kilometre long pipeline that effectively takes surplus water from the north up near the Humber down southwards, distributing it along the way, ending up in Ipswich and Colchester. The length of pipeline that we are delivering is 2.5 times the length of the M25. For any of you that have the pleasure of driving around that, so it's an enormous undertaking. The idea being that it provides resilience, it takes that surplus water into areas of deficit, and it enables Anglian Water to have a national distribution of water, giving much greater flexibility in terms of kind of water stress. Next slide, please. And then finally, who is the Strategic Pipeline Alliance? Well, it's made up of 5 partners, led by Anglian Water, with Costain, Mott, MacDonald, Bentley, Jacobs and Farrans, all providing expertise in the water sector, in the construction sector and the commissioning areas, brought together under a Project 13 organisation to deliver outperformance. And that outperformance is not just cost, it's time, it's quality, and it's carbon and environmental impacts. So it's a really exciting alliance. It's one of many that Anglian Water have delivering their capital programmes. It's the newest one. So hopefully you'll get a bit of a flavour of some of the challenges and some of the unique approaches that we're adopting to deliver some really high performance. Without further ado, I will hand over to Ellie, who's just going to lead on a culture of innovation.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Ellie Taylor and I head up stakeholder engagement and communications on SPA. So it's basically all internal and external communications across the programme. Thanks, Gabby. Next slide, please. So in terms of a bit of a culture of innovation moment, so innovation is absolutely critical to the Alliance. It's just not possible to do everything in a conventional way. And as Matt has outlined, you've got that huge geography across hundreds of kilometres. So we were kind of looking at how we can engage with members of the public and the various organisations that we need to secure our permissions. And just as we were getting going, COVID hit, and I think there was a bit of an assumption that perhaps we might go on pause for 6 months. And I'm thinking, this is going to go on for longer than 6 months, and here we are. Actually, it's 2 years today, I think, since lockdown. So what I wanted to ensure is that the programme was able to continue to be delivered. So we came up with another way of doing that. At my partner organisation, we came up with a virtual event space. So you can see that's the first one we did. It's developed a little bit since then, but it's basically set up to look like a village hall, and you see all the boards and and exhibition boards that you would in a village hall setup. So we've had to really use technology to our advantage. We've used it now on all of the sections so far. So we've done about half a dozen of these virtual events now. We use live chat, we use Facebook to promote it, QR codes and things on the sites. But we found this to be a much cheaper, a more efficient way of delivering these events. And actually, we're getting a better response. We're getting a wider demographic than sort of the sort of usual suspects that you might find in a village hall. And we find it a more sustainable solution as well, because you haven't got all the waste materials that you would on a kind of a traditional face-to-face event. We still do face-to-face meetings with parish councils and organisations, but for the vast majority of people, this works really well. So we're reaching more people and younger people as well in terms of the profile through advertising on social media. And our last event, which we've just finished last week, we had over 600 people come to an event, which is roughly, I would say, probably 4 or 5 times more people than we would expect at a village hall. So there you go. There's just a bit of an insight into the sorts of things we're doing differently from an engagement perspective. And I'm passing over to Steve.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephen Hobson. I'm system design lead for the northern section of the pipeline. So this is a section of the pipeline from Lincoln down to Peterborough and across to Downham Market. It's approximately 120 kilometres, which is a decent length of pipeline for us to be looking at. My role as the system design lead is management of the design team and delivery of the design. Can we move on to the first slide, please? So, as previously mentioned by Ellie, the main strapline sort of for SPA is deliberately delivering differently, which isn't the easiest of things to say. So, from a design point of view, there are 4 elements that I sort of see to this. One is a production methodology, mentality, ethos. A right first time ethos, which is important to us through time, cost and programme. Hygienic install. And one of the other things that we're looking at, which will be covered a little bit later, is low water commissioning. The production mindset sort of runs through both design and delivery, so whereby we develop standard products, strategies and guides sort of for any of the repeatable sort of solutions or activities. What we do then is we rehearse the design and we trial the activities. First, sort of like to confirm that the process is correct, and secondly, to ensure that the site teams, amongst most things, are working to those methodologies, to those designs, and they're bought into the sort of like the product or that activity. Because if you get the buy-in from everybody, things work so much more smoothly. So from the design side, we've developed a catalogue. So this slide is showing our product catalogue that's sort of both products and procedures, giving the project teams easy access to them. Some of the products in the catalogue have been brought in from the partner organisations. Others have been developed by SPA. Some have been brought in from other Anglian Water alliances. This sort of catalogue of standard details and products gives users access to drawings, strategies, procedures in the BIM 360 environment, or in SPA documentation in the CDE through sort of embedded hyperlinks. Could I have the next sort of slide, please, Gabby? Some of the products that we've developed have been developed with a view to future monitoring. Excuse me, and we're able to include fittings for such things as hydrophones and pressure loggers. I think you can see from these details what we're showing on the top of the T's, that we've got our sort of washout assemblies. We've also got a riser pipe for fitting hydrophones and future pressure loggers and the like, so that we can actually get real-time monitoring by placing loggers and sensors in the boundary boxes. Generally speaking, these sort of OX arrangements are placed at 3 kilometre spacings, certainly along the steel pipeline, based on how the hydrophones sort of work, and generally located against highways or other suitable hard access. Next slide, please, Gabby. So another element is, as I mentioned previously, is the right first time approach. So as I said, to achieve this, we're building time into the programme so we can trial products and procedures and strategies. So this sort of slide is demonstrating that work we've done. There's a slide missing there. Is there a slide prior to that? Sorry, thank you. Demonstrates work that we've done sort of on flange management. The business took a decision at a very early stage that we were going to use welded steel pipe, and that, with the quality assurance around it, reduced sort of the risk of failure or leakage through a high level sort of quality assurance system for monitoring the welding. We took on board also some of the outcomes and discussions from a seminar that the Guild actually held probably about a year ago now, around flange joints, and in particular discussions around gaskets. We then sort of went to the industry to try and understand these issues. We then developed a strategy around this and designed around the use of sort of steel rubber gaskets and the use of 4.6 grade bolts. What we were trying to do was standardise to make the site installation simpler, reduce the risk of there being any mix-up. So by standardising on 4.6 grade bolts and the steel rubber gaskets, you know, apart from the size of each, there shouldn't be a risk of getting the wrong gasket in the wrong place. We then trialled the installation and the methodology, and this is sort of like one of our swabbing oxa arrangements, and we use different types of flange assemblies to check what we've got. This one here was actually the full mock-up of the steel rubber gasket assembly with 4.6 grade bolts. We then sort of took this and tested it firstly up to 16 bar, which is our maximum operating pressure, and then took it up to 24 bar at 1.5 times in simplistic terms, and held that pressure to confirm that our torque settings that we'd worked out, and that the gasket and that the whole procedure about the assembly was correct, and such to the point that we can now repeat that. There's no reason, you know, it's doing the same thing time and time again. These assemblies are built up in this sort of workshop, as you can see here, checked, QA'd, and then transported to site. You jump onto the next slide, please, Gabby. So, as I said, at an early stage of project life cycle, a decision was made to use steel for the larger diameter pipes. And learnings from sort of recent projects that a lot of the partners have been involved in showed sort of an issue with the weld methods and the generation of weld splatter. The weld splatter was a big problem, as it has the sort of potential to damage the internal line of the pipework. We know a real safe method of being able to assess it or repair the damage, certainly on pipelines from 800 mil down. You know, you're never really going to get a machine or certainly get a man in there. It's not really a safe process. So again, we engage with the industry, and a couple of weld methods were proposed. A flux core method, which is the traditional method used in the field. However, that's the method that generates the weld splatter. So another method was put forward, which was a TIG weld method. However, you know, this is a weld method that's generally used in a workshop setting where the environment is stable. So therefore, as per our sort of production process, we actually trialed these. We put sections of pipe and set up a mock section and welded and undertook this installation. So I'm probably just going to hand over to Murdo McAngus, who will explain a little bit more detail about the trial that we undertook. Thank you.
That's great, Steve. Thank you. Gabby, if we could go back 2 slides, please. Perfect. Yeah, so the approach to this project, we knew it was going to be different from the outset. So I should have introduced myself. I'm Murdo McAngus, project manager for Ceramax. Ceramax are the welding contractor that has been selected to bring its expertise, track record and quality to this project. From the outset on the SPA project, as has been touched on before, there was a clear indication that we needed to go for a zero splatter, zero coating damage on the internal of the pipe, based on the need for reducing the flushing of the pipeline at the end and ensuring that there was adequate quality controls, as it's obviously potable water. So as Steve mentioned there, we looked at the site trials. There was initiation through SPA to bring in contractors and different technologies, look at what was deemed as a workshop method where everything is easy. It's or easier, should I say, because everything is in a controlled environment. It's in one workshop, everything is there, and looking at how we can bring that sort of environment to the field. This would ensure obviously the quality of the product at the end, but also ensure that we had a robust solution. And combining all these factors with the site trials and committing to SPA and its shared values, and also going through all the procurement processes, we understood exactly what we were taking on and ensured that we could deliver a quality product at the end that would meet not just the strict zero splatter, zero repairs, hygiene critical, that's one side, but also we know we're on a tight schedule, production schedule, so to come in and meet and exceed the expectation with the TIG process, that is something that we have managed to develop and achieve and deliver. We can move on, Gabby, to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. One back. Perfect. So to get...
Murdo, you got 1 minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool.
So to get the quality, we looked at putting in a TIG process first, but that wouldn't give us also the robustness of the weld. So we then went back to the flux core to ensure the integrity of the actual strength of the weld. As again, just going back to the trials, the picture there on the left is a camera monitoring the internals on a demo to ensure that there was no contamination getting in on the trials, and then we could take that forward into the production. So again, Ceramax came in, proposed methods that were workshop orientated, but we made them work on the field. So I think that'll be my time. Thank you. Handing over.
Super.
Rob.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Murdo. Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, I'm Rob Slade. I work for Anglian Water and I'm head of strategic supply integration. I suppose, what does that mean? Fundamentally trying to help and support SPA in terms of the design, construction, and then commissioning, and then fundamentally how we integrate the strategic interconnector into BAU at the end of this AMP. So I suppose first thing to say, it says waterless commissioning. It is depending on how you say this. In my head, this is not about using no water at all. This is water-less commissioning. So again, it's just an important point in terms of the travel that we've been on over the last 18 months, so a couple of years. So if you could just go to the next slide, please. So fundamentally, the challenge, I mean, we've talked about design. Ultimately, there's obviously the construction element of this about putting, you know, essentially 400 kilometres of pipeline into the ground. That's a big enough challenge in itself. In my head as well, equally, is about getting water into the pipeline, testing it, commissioning it, and obviously making use of it when it comes out the other end. If you just think about this traditionally, and I think this is widely kind of transferred across the industry, there's a traditional approach in terms of commissioning pipelines, and that uses an extreme amount of water. So if we applied this traditional approach in SPA, we would kind of have in the region of a 1.5 billion litre requirement, which is huge. And if I just drop to the last bullet point on here, it is rather perverse in terms of delivering a strategic interconnector in a project like this, which is fundamentally about reducing and addressing long-term supply-demand imbalance, were we to actually use a significant amount of water in actually commissioning this project. So it was a great challenge to be involved in, like I said, probably 18 months ago. And again, fundamental to that was other considerations about environmental. So again, if you're using that amount of water, how would you discharge that into the environment, which obviously creates a significant pollution risk. There is obviously a cost element to this as well. So certainly around lagoon constructions, and I'll just come on to a couple of minutes in terms of what we're proposing and how we can kind of mitigate that. Time as well, if you start applying, you know, traditional commissioning approaches with regards to that, again, it starts to get a bit prohibitive in terms of a program. Carbon, again, just in terms of producing the water, we've got areas where, one, we haven't actually got the water available, and therefore it would actually start to need tempering pumping stations to be actually installed and constructed to actually drive that water. So again, you know, trying to lessen the use of that is really, really important for us on SPA. Goes in hands with regards to added design constraints as well. So ultimately, we knew very early on that a new commissioning approach was required. So if you could just go on to the next slide, please, Gabby. It's fair to say when we started this process in terms of what could we do, one of the things that was absolutely going to be really, really important to us as we start on that journey is really around the upstream process. So Stephen and Murdo touched on this just a couple of minutes ago, but we have had an absolute laser focus on through grade hygiene when it comes to the actual where our product is coming from. So, you know, the steel pipeline in itself, and there is MDPE that we lay, HDPE that we're laying as well. So there's very much an audit process in place with regards to where it's manufactured, where it's transited, and how we then store and actually install the pipeline. We've created, like I said, a lot of focus around the hygiene charter. So again, training, making sure that it's visible and making people aware of the need to ensure that hygiene practices are maintained wherever possible. Site hygiene boards as well. So again, it allows the site agents and the construction managers to be really clear about what the challenges are on different aspects of that site. Hygiene boxes at every work location, and you can see an example of that in the bottom left-hand corner. Forensic use of end caps from factory to the point of weld, and again, there's some pictures here just in terms of the Lincoln to Grantham site, which again we are auditing on a regular basis to make sure that you know, everything is maintained as best as we possibly can. Touched on previously in terms of pre-inspection prior to welding. And then absolutely, we've got training and audits by Anglian Water scientists. And again, we're very clear about trying to promote speak ups and near misses, just to make sure that you know, it's not just all about the negative. It's absolutely about the positive, and recognizing where, you know, certainly in terms of the Lincoln to Grantham site, you know, there is a high degree of focus on hygiene, and then just that production mentality has really seen benefits around that. So that's very much about the upstream process, which will absolutely interface with regards to what we're trying to do in terms of that construction, and therefore ultimately the commissioning of that pipeline. So if you could just go on to the next slide, please. So we spent a lot of time working with the partners within SPA and across the wider industry in terms of trying to understand what the art of the possible is with regards to this. And again, just to build on what Stephen and Murdo talked about, is the importance of trials before we actually start to do this in anger. So we were really fortunate where Lincoln to Grantham, we were able to start to trial some of these techniques that we wanted to use in SPA. And we've also been fortunate as well in terms of actually using a pipeline in our one of our Norwich to Windham schemes, where we could actually start to try and understand the benefits of this and put it into practice with regards to what we can actually use and how we can scale this up as well. So we very much centered around the use of air to drive swabs. That's both in washing, but also the disinfection. So instead of water driving the swabs, we've actually got air, which is driving two swabs, which has got slug of either wash water or chlorinated water for the disinfection process. That has been hugely successful on the trials, and as you can see in some of those stats, we've certainly got 99% water saving during the air swab washing. We've pipeline cleaned to drinking water standards within 24 hours of that as well. 85% water savings during the air swab disinfection, and all of those had 100% water quality pass rate, which again gave us very much confidence in terms of actually managing stakeholders within Anglian Water. The key point around that is bringing AW operational people and also our water quality colleagues within Anglian Water along a bit of a journey with regards to this as well. And we are, well, as of yesterday, we've now got this process approved in terms of a document that we called POSWAT, which is essentially our standards and our policies when it talks about water hygiene, because that's the fundamental point here. Obviously, the standards that we talk about have to ensure that when we commission and put the pipeline into supply, we are maintaining that high quality of water that we need to make sure that we are providing to our customers. If you could just do on to the next slide, please, Gabby. So essentially benefits, and again, these are all scalable. So again, they can be used both on the large diameter steel pipeline, which the largest is 800 that we're using in SPA, and fundamentally for the remainder of the interconnector, we go down to 560 PE. So these are all scalable in terms of what we're actually trying to do. So we've got a significant reduction in water footprint to circa 1% of conventional methods for swab washing. Significant reduction in the water footprint for disinfection. So again, roughly around about 85%, while still meeting our water quality standards. Reduction in lagoon size is estimated to be 75%. That still needs a little bit of work because, again, hopefully based on the demonstration that Stephen talked about in terms of, that flange management, that QA wrapper around that, we won't have certain failures around flanges when we're doing pressure tests. But if that was to occur, then we need to think again about what the mitigation action is with regards to that. But again, this all builds in terms of that process and that production line mentality that we're trying to include within SPA. It obviously reduces environmental risk from, large volumes of water being released into the environment. Definitely a reduction in program for commissioning and reduced risk to SPA commissioning by adoption of definitely the hygiene and SPA jointing practices. It is also quite agile as well, so it does allow us to deal with certain flexibilities, to deal with uncertainties. So again, for me, it's been a great challenge. We are literally just on the cusp of that getting approved, and we will absolutely use it as a base solution for SPA moving forward when we start to commission these 400 kilometres. So thanks very much for that, and I think I now hand over to Matt. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. Nearly there. This is my last. I've got 3 slides here to go on 6 capitals thinking. So next slide, please. I lead on sustainability for SPA. So we are using something called the 6 capitals to help us drive sustainability through SPA, and this is something that Anglian Water developed about 3 years ago. And why did it do it? Well, to help Anglian Water bring environmental and social prosperity to the region it serves. So that's its purpose. And so we have adopted the 6 capitals approach, and we are using it, as I say, to drive sustainability in SPA. But what is it? Well, some of you will be very familiar with it, but for those who aren't, you'll at least be familiar with something like natural capital, I'm sure. So natural capital, recognizes the value of the environment and the ecosystem around us. And we want to be able to deliver the SPA solution in a way that protects or ideally enhances the natural capital. So that is one of the lenses through which we examine everything we do, is the natural capital. How well is how well does that solution meet the natural capital needs? And Rob talking about the waterless commissioning is an excellent example of that. But the other lenses we use are listed there on the screen. So besides natural capital, we've got social capital. So how well are we protecting, enhancing the communities in which we work? Where should we go next? Let's go to people capital. So that's talking about our people, the SPA people. Are we looking after health and safety and well-being? And how does this decision, how does this solution impact upon that? Financial capital is the one that we've always been very focused on. We remain focused on, is making sure that we use the money we've got as wisely as possible. So that's the financial capital. Then the less intuitive ones, perhaps intellectual and manufactured capital. Let's do manufactured capital next. That it relates to the assets we are using to create a solution, or that we're building to create a solution, and making sure that the assets are fit for purpose, not just for today, but for the future, particularly with respect to the changing climate. And then the intellectual capital. This has come up in a number of ways throughout the presentation already, and perhaps the best is right at the start, where we talked about SPA is not just, say, Anglian Water, one organisation. It's a group of organisations coming together and bringing everything that's in their people, in their heads, the partnerships, the relationships, the innovation to bear on this project. And so the intellectual capital is another lens through which we examine what we're doing. And so in terms of how we then use those 6 capitals, there's 3 simple ways I've listed here as how we are trying to use the 6 capitals in SPA. So as I've already said, to challenge our decisions and designs. So when we come up with a design which is perhaps meets the need and is least cost, we then put those other lenses on it to say how well does it protect or enhance the natural capital. Could we come up with a variation on that scheme or that decision to make it enhance the other capitals? So that's one way in which we use it. We just use it as a lens to challenge ourselves. Secondly, we report against those capitals to show how well we are doing in terms of considering them and protecting them. And ultimately, in introducing a framework like this, you've got to bring people with you and change the culture so that people actually do use it. And so what I'm trying to create in SPA is a 6 capitals culture, is where, you know, sustainability is at the heart of all the decisions, and we use these lenses to challenge ourselves. So that's the 6 capitals thinking we're applying. Let's try and apply it, show you some examples of it. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples. So before we even put a spade in the ground on SPA, the whole driver for SPA recognizes natural capital. So something like 85 million litres of water per day Anglian Water needs to leave in the environment between now and 2045 to protect the natural environment. And one of the primary ways in which it can afford to leave that water in the environment where it's most needed is by having the SPA scheme, the spine mains, to bring water from where there's surplus to replace that water that is lost. And so just the driver for it is the driver for SPA is protecting and enhancing natural capital. And so there will be something like 12 plus rivers, you know, benefiting from those sustainability reductions across our region. Then let's look at a specific project within SPA. So if we look at a project in the Norfolk part of Anglian Water, where we've used the pipe plough. And this is a fantastic example of doing things differently in Anglian Water, never used before, where we're using this pipe plough. And on this particular project, we used it for a 6-kilometre stretch. And it's a lower carbon solution for lane mains than open cut. I think it took something nearly 90 tons of carbon out of that scheme. And for every metre we used that technique rather than another, it reduced the carbon footprint by about 13%. So fantastic from a carbon perspective, which comes under natural capital. And then when commissioning it, Rob's already talked about how we drive water reductions as well. But typically, you know, good solutions like this touch on more than one capital. So I could also talk to you if I had time about how it can drive down costs, time on site, and therefore health and safety risk as well. So that's a fantastic example of different thinking there. The last one I'll mention is biodiversity net gain. So we know the environment bill is bringing this in, and Anglian Water will be delivering a 10% biodiversity net gain, or SPA will be delivering a 10% biodiversity net gain on the new sites that it builds. So that's another aspect of natural capital. Last slide, just to bring some other examples. So let's look at social capital, how we are protecting and enhancing that. Ellie's has led on developing, you know, a strategy to ensure that we really do engage with our communities in a strategic way. She's talked about the virtual public events, which are a great way to engage with the community, and that is at the heart of delivering against social capital. But there are other ways as well. So on the screen, I've put a picture to illustrate apprenticeships and also the Kickstart program. So these are ways in which we are trying to leave a legacy in the community and bring young people into SPA and give them future career opportunity in SPA. So you'll be familiar with the apprenticeship programs. Kickstart is a slightly newer thing, which was a government scheme to get 16 to 24-year-olds, I think it was, who are on universal credit, give them a taste of work, and hopefully that develops into a role. So it was initially a 6-month placement. We took on about 5 Kickstarters, 4 of which are still with us at the end of that time. So it really is helping to create jobs and careers in our region. So recognizing the time constraint, I am going to stop there and hand back to Matt number 1.
I love you, Matt Pluke. Thank you for that. So I'm not going to do a long summary. There's quite a few questions that have come up, but just thanks to everyone for doing the presentations. It's nice just to kind of sit back and reflect. We're in the muck of it all every day, and sometimes you don't see from a helicopter view the amazing work that's going on across Spa, not just from a technical perspective, but from the kind of social and natural capital perspective as well. So thank you very much. That picture there just gave a kind of a view of our first site as we started. We kind of call it a factory in a field. So we're going to go on to the questions. I got the task of facilitating the questions. We've got just under 15 minutes. So I'm gonna read out the question and then call out a name for someone to answer it. So I'm going to go in chronological order. So the first one was from Zan Lee. So is the whole pipeline steel? What about flexibility and deflection? So I'll start and then I'll hand over to you, Steve, to explain about flexibility and deflection. So it's not all steel. It's kind of half and half. The top section is definitely steel.
Yep.
When we get to the Bexwell area, we move from a steel solution to an HDPE as the pressures and flows and diameters are smaller. But I will hand over to Steve around the specifics around deflection and flexibility.
So, thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, as Matt says, the pipeline, the majority of the pipeline, certainly in the north, it is steel. It's a steel flexible pipe. Therefore, to overcome that, we're working in fairly narrow trench. We're lucky that we've got quite suitable limestone material currently available to us that we can actually process to an S1. So we can counteract the flexibility by giving the pipe an S1 surround, and the ground that we're currently going through, and it does vary along the spread as you get further south when you're getting into the alluviums. But the idea is to use a processed S1 bedding and process as best we can. The S1 bedding, a lot of people probably think that using an S1 bedding it's quite expensive, but the benefits are that we can use a narrower trench. We don't need people in the excavation to do any compaction, or we don't need to compact the material around the pipe, so it's generally self-compacting, which means that we then reduce the risk of any damage to the linings and coatings to the pipe. So generally speaking, that's the approach that we take, and it does actually speed production. So the offsetting cost of processing an S1 material is offset by the actual speed of production. At the moment, the guys are putting in around, I think that's had a record day a couple of days ago where they had to put 101 meters of steel pipe in one day, and that's the sort of output that we're looking at, which is phenomenal really for this type of pipe.
Fantastic.
That helps. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Very good. Very good. So the next question was from Stuart. Any concerns over cost increases in steel? Yes, I used to have hair and now I don't. So yeah, I think we're all feeling that pressure. We're trying to mitigate it as much as possible, working very closely with our supply chain, looking at what we can do in terms of bulk orders. When do we actually place the orders? When do we need the pipeline? Obviously, we're at an all-time peak at the moment, so very much aware of the cost pressures. We're slightly in between a rock and a hard place in that we've got to deliver this project in 5 years. It's not a nice thing to do. It's an absolute must. In the south of the area, we will run out of water by the end of this AMP unless we get our pipeline in place and start flowing water through it. So we're trying to get the best way through of meeting the program, but also keeping the costs down. So very aware of all of those cost pressures. So great question.
So just picking up on that, I had a discussion with not one of our suppliers this morning, and they recognise the pressures, and the industry recognises the pressures, certainly with the Ukraine situation as it is at the moment, given that most of it all comes from there. But there's definite drive for Turkey. They are upping their output to try and meet demand. So things globally are happening, and the supply chain's looking further afield, India, China, and even into South America to see what can support the supply. So excellent. Going forward, hopefully we should be in a bit stronger place.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it's it's very interesting when you look, 2 or 3 tiers down the supply chain in terms of the global footprint that these jobs have. So that's good to hear. So Rob, I'm going to give you 3 seconds to think of an answer. I'm going to hand this one over to you. So the question was around what considerations did you make in terms of material choice, in terms of whole life TOTEX?
3 seconds. Right. Okay. Yeah, I've used that. So all of these decisions went through an RV process in terms of that solution phase. And a lot of work was done by optimatics in terms of trying to look at all the different scenarios and the modelling and the design for the future use of the strategic interconnector. All of those had plugged in certainly the cost around steel in terms of obviously buying, procuring, but also purchasing, but there's also fundamentally operating it in the future as well. So that optimatics were really, really helpful in actually us trying to determine a whole life TOTEX solution for the strategic interconnector. So yeah, that was worthwhile. And I think if we didn't have that, we might even still be squirreling away today in terms of coming up with the most optimum solution. So that was a godsend in terms of real value for money, but actually try and drive some real benefit for us. So yeah, that's essentially what we did.
Matt, can I add to that, to say that that same process, carbon was factored into it as well. So in the same way that capital costs and OPEX costs were factored into that optimatics process, capital carbon and OPEX was operational carbon to optimize on that too.
Yeah, fantastic. Yep. And we looked obviously at whole life. We looked at past performance deterioration rates of pipeline to look at what the future maintenance liability was, and we didn't necessarily go with the cheapest capital solution because actually whole life there was significant benefits in choosing the material choices that we did from an operational and from a carbon perspective. Excellent. So there's a question around, are we going to keep this team together? I see that Craig Fisher's answered that one on the text. I don't know, Craig, you want to pop your face on screen and just talk a little bit about how we're planting people across SPA to show lessons learned on those new schemes we start up? He might have dropped off. No, he's gone. So just read Craig's response. It's an excellent response. It's a good read. I recommend it. Next one is around, do you feel, this is from Daniel Jefferson, do you feel the learnings from this project could support a more uniformed approach across the water sector, especially regarding waterless commissioning? So that's a fantastic question. So I will start and then I'll hand over to Rob on that one again. So very much, I think what we're looking to do, with the financial challenges and the delivery program challenges, we're definitely about learning lessons on SPA and perhaps creating new standards, new ways of working, and then sharing it with the wider industry. Part of this call here is just to kind of share at a very high level what we're doing, so people can kind of see that the art of the possible of some of the work that we're doing. And that's, Stephen and I had a quick chat this morning, talking about flange management strategy and the fact that in oil and gas there's never a leak, whereas in water there sometimes is, whereas actually on SPA we just want to commission it once, pressure test it, and then it goes. And I think Stephen said, treat your water as if it's oil. You don't want to spill it. So a different mindset of delivery that we hope captures the imagination of everyone, and then people can take on the lessons and the experiences that we've got into their future projects. From a waterless commissioning perspective, Rob, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to your point that fundamentally we're dealing with a fairly cheap product in itself, as in water. So again, I think absolutely things have had to change. I was just reading the chat and somebody's put in there about, air pigging was used on the Hannington to Pittsford main back in 2015. But again, it hasn't really kind of leapt off from there at all. So again, across Anglian Water, we haven't used it within the company potentially since then. But again, across the wider industry, we looked at Thermil, Hallbank, slightly different. But again, very much used around traditional methods for that, as opposed to what we're actually trying to do within Anglian Water. And again, the drivers are potentially slightly different, but absolutely it should absolutely feed in across the wider industry to try and use less water as much as we possibly can, because it's a precious resource, and it's becoming certainly in the east of the region, it's becoming more and more precious as the years go by. So yeah, it's definitely around certainly water efficiency, our learning in terms of what other water companies are doing. So again, it plays a important part. So
fantastic, thanks, Rob. a question about gaskets and bolts, which I'm looking straight at Stephen Hobson. So, do you feel the WIMES documents on gasket bolt selection, perhaps large and complex, for the flange installation support production on site?
I was trying to work out where Dan was going with that sort of question. I think what we've looked at is to try simplify everything for ourselves that suits ourselves. WIMES is sort of written for a wide range of sort of systems and installations, whereas we're just looking at this this pipeline primarily, and sort of like set pressures. So yeah, I think there is some simplification. I think going on to also covering a question sort of like lower down that Willie Lanigan sort of putting about the nut bolt set grades and gasket types, who decided on those. Well, as I said, we spoke to the industry, and certainly a specific person, I don't know whether he's on your spoke sort of with Craig Edwards, who's a very knowledgeable person on that sort of subject. It was ourselves within SPA that decided on that strategy. We made the decision, but taking the guidance and the knowledge from sort of people within the industry to come up with this specification, and then trialed it. Taking their sort of guidance on best practice, and that's how we developed that. I think there's a lot to change in the industry. We accept that standard EPDM gaskets are the norm, but we also accept that these things leak, and if they leak, we just tighten them up even more, and that's not the way that we should be doing it. We just need to have probably a different thought, a different mindset. It's everything that Matt's been saying, about the whole of SPA. It's a different mindset, and we just need to accept and be open to those challenges.
Fantastic. So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm not going to go right to the wire because I appreciate that people probably have got a 1 o'clock in their calendars. So I'm going to do one more. I'm going to bring Murdo in because I think he's the only person I've not picked on yet. So there's a question around, how did you establish the time requirements for the trialing and testing to ensure the right first time approach?
Well, I think Craig has mentioned that as well from the SPA point of view. It was built into the schedule, and I think that's a key point in bringing in. There's a lot been touched on the supply chain, bringing in the supply chain in due time, and that's key throughout SPA. And it's really refreshing that we're allowed to come to the table with different ideas, and people can come in and not get laughed out the room or close the door because there's a new way of doing things. So getting the time up front, we know it's difficult, but from a Ceramax point of view, we're able to react and adapt. And it's the same, I think, if you get the supply chain involved up front and you share with them the expectations, what you want to change, how you want to go forward. You might not know the method, but bringing it open to the table and getting the ideas coming in, I think that's the key, and doing it getting these guys engaged as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. We all know the expertise is in the supply chain, and it's about tapping into that expertise early rather than starting your job and then changing as you're doing your job. You have to plan to get it right first time, and that means kind of holding your nerve, creating that space up front to do those trials and then see what you learn, and then implement that learning into your delivery. Fantastic. There's a few more questions I haven't answered. We will ensure they are answered, and with the Pipeline Industry Guild, we will get some responses back. So, Gabby, am I handing back to you or to Catherine? Who wants to close this out?
I think that's it. We just wanted to thank everyone for coming. We will be sharing the slides, and as Matt said, we'll be looking at the questions we haven't answered yet. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks to all the presenters and thanks for all the questions to make it really engaging. And have a good afternoon. Thanks all.
Thanks a lot.
Right, thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good afternoon. Cheers. Bye.